his career spanning nearly half a century, Stanley Kubrick released 4 war films: Fear and Desire, Paths of Glory, Dr. Strangelove or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, and Full Metal Jacket. You could argue that Spartacus counts, but war is not the main plot point in that film, so excluding that, he has only made 4, and today we are going to be discussing 3 of them: Paths of Glory, Dr. Strangelove, and Full Metal Jacket. Fear and Desire is often called Kubrick's worst film. It's a movie that the director has disowned, and was quoted saying it was like a child's drawing on the fridge. Thematically, it's pretty lackluster and doesn't really lend itself to the conversation. However, his other 3 films, in addition to being great, offer quite a few unique messages about war and what it does to the people in those wars. On the surface, all 3 films are about war, but each offer different messages, different meanings, different interpretations, and different views. Steven Spielberg once said,
What made Stanley Kubrick so special was he was a chameleon. He never made the same picture twice.
Referring to how all of his films vary so much. What is so interesting about these 3 films is that despite that they're all about war, they each offer unique views on it. Let's begin by discussing the 3 films on their own and some of the biggest themes in each of these movies. First, Paths of Glory was released in 1957 and is set in World War I, and follows a commander who has to deal with a mutiny after his soldiers refuse to fight, all while defending his men against a general. This is by far the most human of the movies we'll be discussing today. It's my personal favorite, and I think it's the best, and it's all around a fantastic film. Thematically, the biggest issues covered in this film are, first, the absurdity of war. This is a big theme covered in all 3 of these films, but seeing as this one touched upon it first, I will be discussing it here first. Through clever editing and phenomenal dialogue delivered near perfectly, you can see that there really is no reason to be fighting this war. The soldiers refuse to attack an enemy base knowing it will lead to their imminent death, and because of that, they are scolded for being cowardly.
They're not advancing. Those miserable cowards. They're not advancing.
The only reason that the base was going to be captured wasn't for a strategic advantage. It was all about politics. This movie is able to show that politics interfering in war is always going to cause problems. Class hierarchy is another big theme in this movie. Kubrick shows this off in a few ways. The first being where he shows people. All of the high-ranking officers are seen in expensive locations like these grand halls. Meanwhile, the foot soldiers are almost always photographed in the trenches. He also achieves this by never showing a German soldier. All of the antagonists in the movie are the higher-ranking French officers. Kubrick shows that as long as there are classes or a hierarchy of some sort, there will be war. You have superior officers yelling at inferior officers and inferior officers yelling at foot soldiers. In theory, everyone should be on the same team, but because of class, everyone will try and take advantage of each other to show off their superiority. The one exception to that rule is Colonel Dax, played by Kirk Douglas, who sees his troops as real people, and wants what's best for them, and challenges his superior officers over this. However, the main theme that is presented in this is that whenever there's class hierarchy, people are always going to try and take advantage of each other and try and make the best for them instead of making the best for everyone. The third theme that this movie touches upon is that people are not cannon fodder. Now this is a theme that is shown off in countless movies. I've already touched upon this theme in my Mad Max Fury Road analysis, however it's very important to look at this inside this film. This can be seen because of how well developed the soldiers are. That is because people are people, and it's human nature to feel compassion for them. Once we get to know them, we begin to feel compassion for them. And Kubrick was able to utilize that to show off this theme. People are more than a tool in war. They're people. Moving on to 1964, in which Kubrick released Dr. Strangelove. In order to make sure that this isn't a 2-hour video, from this point on we're going to drop the or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. This film is set in the Cold War and shows politicians and military generals trying to stop a nuclear holocaust that threatens the entire world. The biggest difference between this and Paths of Glory is the tone. Whereas Paths of Glory is by all means a war drama, Dr. Strangelove is by all means a war comedy, and a very funny one at that. Just like all of these movies, this movie takes a very anti-war stance, but shows it off in a unique way. Instead of flat out saying war is bad, the film instead looks at what happens when war continues to the point when the world ends, and sure enough, it isn't good. One thing that is interesting about this movie is that unlike the other 2 films, this movie was released in the middle of the war that it's discussing. So because of that, the film was able to have some real-world impacts. Another impact that came from that was that a lot of the themes covered in that movie are almost exclusive to the Cold War. However, there are a few that are about war in general, and those are the ones that we are going to be discussing. The first is the blind love of war that we see through Major King Kong. With a name that is as subtle as the actual King Kong, Major King Kong is someone that lives in the now and doesn't think things through. Instead, he just does. He doesn't think of the consequences, be that dropping a bomb and possibly starting on World War III, or climbing on top of a bomb that is about to be dropped. He is someone who has a blind love of war and doesn't think of the consequences, thus killing himself and the entire world. However, he wasn't solely responsible for the rest of the world, and that debt can be put on the people in the war room. The biggest thing that Kubrick shows off through these scenes is that communication is very important. The world leaders meet in the war room to try and discuss peace. Yes, that's how great the irony is.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
However, when discussing peace, the war room lives up to its name, and both the Americans and the Russians are trying to take advantage of each other to try and win the war instead of finding peace. The lack of communication is what ends the war after the Russians developed the Doomsday device, something that can destroy the entire world if Russia is attacked. Unfortunately, Russia never told America that, so because of a lack of communication, they were unaware of the fact and continued on their warpath. A lack of communication between the Americans is what caused the fighters to fly over Russia, and a lack of communication is why the pilots didn't know what they were doing. Moreover, Major King Kong is almost always shown wearing earmuffs, something that deters communication. In a war, communication is always important, and the catastrophic events that occur in Dr. Strangelove are caused because of a lack of communication. Finally, in Full Metal Jacket, we get a combination of the previous two. Some elements are comedic, and these are spares.
What have we got here? A fucking comedian, private joker.
But for the most part, this movie is a straight-up drama. What this movie shows is the toll that war takes both from the American soldiers and the Vietnamese people and their culture. The deprivation of culture is seen on both sides of the war. First, we see the Americans lose it in the opening credits. After we see the title of the song, "Goodbye, my sweetheart, hello, Vietnam," plays. In this war, Americans left behind their lives to go risk their lives fighting overseas. While the song plays, we see the foot soldiers getting haircuts, or turning from people into maggots. Maggots is the term that their drill instructor uses to call them before they become Marines. Throughout the first half of the film, we see them growing into Marines, all except for one.
Private Pile!
From his first interaction with Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, Private Leonard Lawrence was dehumanized, given an insulting nickname, made fun of, and even made his fellow soldiers hate him. This relates to what I was saying earlier when discussing Paths of Glory. In theory, all the soldiers to be should be on the same team. They should be working together to overcome the obstacles. However, Sergeant Hartman ultimately puts all the other Marines against Private Pile, and this leads them all to hate him. They have to do extra work because he cannot do his part. Because of that, they start to beat him and really dehumanize him. In boot camp, these people aren't able to give each other common courtesies, let alone respect. In training, Sergeant Hartman forces his religion on Private Joker.
Private Joker, do you believe in the Virgin Mary?
Sir, no, sir!
Who's later forced to sing,
Happy birthday, dear Jesus.
This just shows that the soldiers are losing their personalities during the war and becoming less than human. The effects on the American soldiers can all be seen in the first half of the film. In the second half, it shows what the United States has ultimately done to Vietnam. This is another big theme brought up in a lot of Vietnam War movies like Apocalypse Now, and it's interesting to see how it's shown off in this film. The first interaction we see is with Private Joker and a prostitute. Because it brings them good money, Vietnamese women were forced to go into the sex trade for American soldiers. This speaks volumes both symbolically and literally. America was destroying the country and ruining the lives of the women. Right after that, a Vietnamese man steals the camera, which shows that the Vietnam War forced others to go into a life of crime. Moreover, the war caused the Vietnamese to lose a major part of their culture, Tet. Tet is a holiday described as 4th of July, Christmas, and New Year's all rolled into one. Yet the Vietnamese give that up so they can try and have a strategic advantage over the Americans. In turn, this leads to more death and even more destruction and a loss of culture. So when you compare these three films, it's interesting to see how Kubrick showed war. It was seen most positively through Paths of Glory, in which we see a good person doing his best to try and protect the soldiers he's in charge of. War isn't painted positively, but certain aspects are. The camaraderie between the soldiers and Colonel Dax in particular. However, he also shows off the negative side, and there's plenty of that still in the film.
Order the 75s to commence firing on our own positions.
In Full Metal Jacket, however, it only shows off the problems with war. There is no camaraderie between soldiers, they all hate each other. There is no positive leader bringing them together, there is a leader pushing them apart. In Paths of Glory, the soldiers are fighting for their land, but in Full Metal Jacket, they are fighting only to destroy. Dr. Strangelove stands in the middle. It is more of a warning about war and can show off the very negative results of the war. It's able to show that there are nothing but consequences and very few benefits, but it does it in a comedic way, so a lot of the messages may not sink in as much as something shown in such brutality and such honesty as Full Metal Jacket or Paths of Glory. Regardless, all three of these films are phenomenal. And that's my interpretation of what Kubrick was saying in each of these films. Make sure you drop a comment and tell me what you think he was saying throughout these three films. Drop a like if you enjoyed and subscribe so you can join me next time. On the topic of the Vietnam War, the video on the left is going to take you to a scene analysis of Apocalypse Now. It was my first analytical video I made a while ago, so please don't be too harsh. But I do discuss some reoccurring themes that also show up in some of these movies. On the right is going to be my full analysis of Mad Max Fury Road. If you want to see that, make sure you check it out. And if not, make sure you have a great day.